Amen.
Okay, just a few words because um uh, what we teach here is because of these two gentlemen and Dr. George M. Lamsa. And we all know that Dr. Lamsa is the guy that translated the Bible from Aramaic, what they call Peshitta text, directly into English. Now, just a couple things. Well, let me mention about the Bible. Um, the fact that he translated it, though he used the format of the King James in our Bible, he used that format. The the scrolls that he used um, were were from, well, they were actually from the third and fourth century, and and because he went from the scrolls directly into English, okay, he avoided, there's like 14 other official versions of the Bible, and so uh, it doesn't contain a whole lot of the dogma or the whatnot. So it's early Christianity. And then the other thing about Dr. Lamsa, okay, he is now if you see and you see lots of other Aramaic people doing Aramaic stuff now and doing this, that, but Dr. Lamsa is the authentic, he is the man that introduced Aramaic, the language of Jesus and of Abraham, as far back as Abraham, to the world in 19. Actually, it started back probably in 1933, I think, is when he did. But 1957, he completed the Bible. All right. Now, what is so unique about Dr. Lamsa is that he was raised in a very remote area of the Kurdistan Mountains, which is now like Iraq, Turkey, basically. Um, and his village where he lived was totally remote from civilization. And when missionaries discovered the area, the people there still ask, were the Romans still in control? And this was like the early 1900s. So, the beauty of the Aramaic translation by Dr. Lamsa is that he spoke the Aramaic language, he knew the culture, and the culture and the traditions there were just like those of Jesus, and actually a lot of them uh, the traditions from the Old Testament on. And so when it came time to translate from the the scrolls, he was the only person that could translate correctly because, as we've learned in the uh, in the classical Aramaic language of the time, there were only about 500 words written. Okay, one word could have many meanings. Because he grew up in that culture, he knew the culture, he knew the language. He's the one that could translate it correctly based on the context of the of whatever the story was. Okay, and then we have Dr. Rocco Errico, and he mentored under Dr. Lamsa for 10 years. Um, and as a result of that, he learned firsthand many of the Near Eastern customs and behaviors because because Dr. Lamsa, you can take um, the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. So he retained many of these culture and traditions, and Dr. Rocco learned from that. Okay, and of course, then Dr. Rocco, for the last 60 years, has carried on the Aramaic translation, and he has contributed greatly and expanded the understanding of the Bible from Aramaic. So I just thought we would put that in there tonight so that everybody recognized that. Okay. Myself and Reverend Martin. Okay. Reverend Martin is now in spirit. Okay. But he's with us, and he will serve as our spiritual advisor. But the way that goes is we studied with Dr. Erico in Atlanta for 13 years. And then I say here for the last 5 years, but now it's almost 8 years. We left. We traveled in an RV, and at the same time we started these classes. And so we've been teaching, and of course, that teaching, you learn from teaching more so than you do from just studying. But that we kind of put it all together, and it's the message that comes out of it. You learn about the translation, the differences, but it's the message that comes out that makes such a difference in our lives. So that is us. All right. And then when we do this, when we teach, all right, we have something called the 4 C's. We are not here to convince you of anything. We're not here to coerce you. We are not here to convert you. And we are not here to condemn you, your religion, or your beliefs. But we do say that you will learn things that may be different from what your religion is, or from what you have been taught to believe. And that's just the way education is. And so you can just take it, take from whatever we say, take from whatever resonates with you, and work with it. Okay. Fear. Okay. Now this is turning out to be, this is going to be at least a two-part session, because as usual, once you get into things like fear and faith, there's so much. So, but basically, we're going to focus on fear tonight. And so, just very basically, what is fear? An unpleasant emotion or thought that you have when you are frightened or worried by something dangerous, painful, or bad that is happening or might happen. Now, technically, there's a difference. Rational fear, okay, and I say rational fear is good, because first of all, we are all going to fear. There's no such thing as a cure for never fearing, because rational fear is good. And from that rational fear, we learn to fear those things that keep us alert and protect us. Okay, one example is, all right, if you're going to cross the street, okay, automatically you will look to your left and look to your right. Why? Because if you didn't, you would be fearful of getting run down. And there's many other just many other that just we have them. It's healthy. And then you have irrational fears, and I didn't really list any here, but irrational fears are like what the psychology world terms as phobias, um, uh, whatever, fear of heights, um, fear of going out of the house, things like that. And really, it how we cope with them to me is really not a whole lot different, though. Um, Again, the psychological world, there's therapies and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, uh, we're going to deal with them biblically speaking. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay. I just found this and I thought it was interesting, just so we get an idea of what fear is. And there are so many classified fears, it's ridiculous. But our good friend Sigmund Freud, okay, he he came up with, there's 3 innate fears, okay. And so I've got the first one listed is the fear of the destructive forces of nature. And of course, that is very real. um, Hurricanes, fires. I put climate change here. I know that politically maybe some people aren't, but and there are so many other things related to the forces of nature. And then a second one, of course, is fear associated with suffering and the physical demands of life. And I just uh, I just put these down here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the fears and your thoughts on fears at the end. But so I just put these down. Certainly, COVID ranks high on the fear list, even yet. Okay, that technically the COVID scare is over, but I want to tell you, people are still reacting uh, according to the COVID. They're still testing for COVID. My neighbor just got COVID, so the fear is still there. And of course, we have things like losing one's job. Um, Here in Florida, we have a fear. Uh, I I I don't know. I don't know it for sure if everybody has this fear, but I have this fear since they passed the law that you do not have to have background checks to buy a gun, and anybody can, in any age, can carry a gun. They don't have to have a concealed weapons permit or anything like that. And so that stirs up a lot of fear. Uh, it doesn't necessarily, for me, but anyway, it is still something to think about. And then I just put this down here as the fear of spiders, because when I was researching this, believe it or not, the number one fear in this country is the fear of spiders. Crazy. But anyway, but that is um, still fear. And the third one that Mr. Freud identified is the fear of death. And just for um, just for information purposes, and I never knew this, but I just thought I would put it down. The fear of death is called, I don't even know that I can pronounce this right, than Thanatophobia. How's that? So, so just keep that in mind. But that's what the term for the fear of death. And when we think about the fear of death, and we look back at these other things, ultimately, uh, we look at we look at illness and suffering and whatnot, and yes, there's a fear of that, but ultimately, it's the fear of death. Now, and so we're going to deal with. We'll get to the fear of death, but we're going to talk about, okay, fear is the root of anger, resentment, stress. It leads to mental illness, physical illness. You know, whatever. If you have anger in you, I mean, if you are afraid of anything, and you come upon whatever that is you're afraid of, you're going to, lots of times there's just anger, resentment, stress, and of course mental illness. Mental illness leads to physical illness, stress. So, and fear feeds the enemy. If you are confronting somebody, if you have fear, you're not going to be real successful at confronting whomever you're confronting. And that's why the concern with fear and how we deal with it. And we'll talk about other kinds of fears, because there's lots of them in this world, and including Jack, artificial intelligence is people are very fearful of that. And so we'll talk about that later. But I want to talk about fear. Okay, faith, fear, how we overcome fear. The number one thing is faith in God. But because, okay, fear, like I say, we're going to have fear. There's no question about it. But fear needs to be put in its place. And we're going to talk about overcoming fear through faith in God. Now, but we got some little concerns here. Okay, learning faith in God normally comes from religion. Okay, but fear also comes from religion. So we're going to focus on that, and in particular, of course, we teach from the Aramaic, the spirit of the word. We teach a whole different concept from modern day Christianity. But let's talk about where the fear comes from in religion. All right, so we're going to go to the Aramaic word for fear, which is diltha. And once again, it's an Aramaic word that has different meanings. And so two of the meanings of this word is fear and revere. So, and when we're talking about Dr. Lamsa translating and putting the correct word in the context of the translation. So fear, essentially, to us, basically to be afraid of someone or something dangerous, painful, or threatening. Okay, that's pretty much the accepted definition that we have. And revere means to feel deep respect or admiration for someone or something, including God, which is what we're going to talk about. Now, in the translations of the Bibles, comparing, I'll say King James here, but it's also um, uh, it's also most of the traditional Bibles too, comparing it to the Lamsa Bible. The difference between those two Bibles concerning the word Delpha, you will find in the King James, you will find fear, fear, fear. Okay? In the Lamsa Bible, the same text, you will see revere. So I've got a couple of scriptures here that show this, and so I just want you to think about what the difference makes in terms of the meaning. Okay, and I'm going to have George read Deuteronomy 14:23. And we're in this case, we're going to read Lamsa first, and then we'll read the KJV second.
Okay. And you shall eat before the Lord your God, in the place where he shall choose to set his name, the tithes of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil, and of the firstlings of your herds, and of your flocks, that you may learn to revere the Lord your God always.
Okay, now go to the King James.
Okay. And thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose to place his name there, the tithe of thy corn, of thy wine, and of thine oil, and the firstlings of thy herds, and of thy flocks, that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God always.
Okay, now before we go on, you see the difference in the translation there, and of course, the fear has carried over anyway into our current Christianity. Just another look here. If you notice, I didn't highlight it, but you notice that the King James says the tithe of thy corn. That is also a mistranslation, and a similar word that, of course, Dr. Lamsa, that did not grow corn at that time in the ancient Near East. So that's just a little aside there. Difference in translation. Okay. All right. I'm going to do this now. I really, yeah, just pay attention to this one. Okay. So once again, I'm going to read the KJV is the second one. All right. I'm going to read that one first. But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healings in his wings, and ye shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall. Does that make sense to anybody? I mean, aside from the fear?
No, it makes no sense at all.
Okay, thank you, George. Okay, but when you go to the Lamsa, okay, we have, but for you who revere my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing upon his lips. And you shall go forth and leap for joy like the calves of the herd. I just this one this is just such a great example of the many mistranslations, which then lead to misunderstanding or no understanding, because I don't know, I have no idea what they meant when they said they would grow up as calves of the stall. But again, it's the translation, and scholars would look up a word somehow, and they may or may not have realized that there was many meanings, but they always would just take the first meaning that they came upon, and therefore, again, in the King James, it's fear, fear, fear. And okay, I have one more example here, and this one leads the way to understanding or misunderstanding, whichever you want to say. And George is going to go ahead and read this one.
The reverence of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all they do his commandments. His praise endures forever.
All right.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all that do his commandments. His praise endures forever.
Okay, now before we move on, let's just think about this fear versus revere difference, and how we how we see God currently. Okay. Fear. I mean, we talk about God fearing. Oh, he's a God fearing man. And fear, uh, fear. Hold on, let me go to the next one before we. Hold on. And fear, of course, has carried that the King James and the traditional versions just have made a huge difference in religion and the understandings, and the God, yeah, the fact that we have a God, we have the Trinity was dreamed up. Excuse my French, but it was, and then God has been, um, well, hold on just a sec. Whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, let me just elaborate then. I thought I had a slide in here. Okay. Um, okay. Here, the idea of fear and religion, all right, came about, with Saint Augustine, way back in the 3rd or 4th century. And if you bear with me for a minute, I'll tell you what he said. I have problems transferring these slides, so if you'll bear with me, it's really significant what he said. Well, I just have to tell you. St. Augustine, okay, St. Augustine is the guy that came up with original sin. Okay. And also, he said that religion that he wanted to scare people into seeking God so that they could receive the grace of God and whatnot. So I'm just going to have to tell you this. I don't, anyway, but that's where fear came in. Now, think about it. Most religions do have a fear element in them. Okay. In our in Christianity, fear. We have fear of going to hell. We have fear that God will punish us and whatnot. And so that's where all this fear with religion began. But so how we overcome fear essentially is with the faith in God. And so we're going to look at the faith in God, and we will progress, I promise, but it's going to take longer. We will progress from the idea of faith from the Old Testament, and then the idea of what Jesus taught, and which is where faith in God, of course, will be faith in love. And then the second part, we're going to progress to those favorite verses that says there is no fear in love. But I just kind of wanted to get, because to get to faith in God, you have to look at what we think God is. So what I thought we would do, overcoming fear through faith in God. The God of the Old Testament. And see, remember, in the Old Testament, there weren't Bibles. There wasn't any theories or anything like that. There was just God, the one God of Israel, and that had come from Abraham on up. So in the Old Testament, all right, God was revered. Okay, and it does not say in the Old Testament. Okay, did they fear things? Well, of course they feared things, but in their eyes, okay, God was responsible for everything. Okay, if something good happened, yes, but if something bad happened, that was God too. Good and bad, winning and losing, that was, and God was mysterious. Okay, they didn't know what we know because that Jesus hadn't been around, and they didn't know what we know, but they had faith. Okay, and God was mysterious. You could not see God, and if you were ever to say or think that you saw the face of God, that you would be stoned. That's how mysterious and how revered he was. And of course, there were no images of God at all. But mainly, God was the one God of Israel, and the faith just came with it. So I thought everybody probably knows the story of David and Goliath. Now, normally when people think of David and Goliath, they go, okay, and they think about the warring factions, and David was this little guy, and he da 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 da. But I want you to put all that war stuff aside, because there is some gory stuff in there, and that's why people won't read it. But when George is going to read the scripture for us, but I want you to think about David and think of it through the heart and mind of David. Okay. And this just came to me. I mean, what an example of faith. And the common term is faith over fear. So we're just going to go ahead and read the story of David and Goliath so that we can get an idea of the faith in God of this young man, and then we'll carry through with faith in God some more. Okay, David and Goliath, and we're starting. Remember, the story is that David, in that time, the Israelis were fighting the Philistines, to conquer their own land and whatnot. And that's so I didn't include the first 37 verses, but this talks about David and George. Go ahead and read the scripture.
And Saul armed David with his own armor and put a helmet of brass upon his head and armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, but he was unwilling to go, for he had not tried them out. So David took them off. And he took his staff in his hand and chose five smooth stones out of the gravel and put them into the shepherd's bag, even into his wallet. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. And behold, the Philistine came and drew near to David, and his shield bearer went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy and of a fair countenance. And the Philistine said to David, I am a dog, that you come to me with a staff. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, you come against me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will slay you and take your head from you, and I will give you the carcass of the host of the Philistines this day to the wild beasts of the earth and to the fowls of the air, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saves not with a sword and spear, and for the battle is the Lord's, and he will deliver you into our hands. And behold, when the Philistines came and drew near to meet David, David hastened and ran to the battle line to meet the Philistines. And David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine in the forehead. And the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David.
Okay. Faith? What faith? Now, you see no fear here. Okay. And we can bring the idea of love in here only because David loved God, the God of Israel, and he had faith in that God. And like I say, I just thought of this, and there's just not a better example of knowing that God's going to be with you, and God will take care of things, and and faith. And this is in the Old Testament. Okay. David had no fear. He acted in perfect faith and love for the God of Israel. Now, this is actually going to be part of next week, but I wanted to get it in here this week because we're going to go to Jesus and the Gospels and faith in God. So you see here that Jesus' message was not about fear, threat, or sacrificial blood for the forgiveness or cleansing of sin. Jesus wasn't about sin whatsoever. His gospel of the kingdom was about love, compassion, forgiveness, all inclusiveness, and God's active presence with and among all races. This was Jesus' vision of God and his joyful message. And this, if we followed the teachings of Jesus, then our faith in God would be faith in love. Okay, so we're going to carry this on to next week, and we're going to go into a little more. We've said this before, that God is love and God is spirit, and we're going to go into a little more, and then we're going to do the New Testament scriptures that talk about there is no fear in love. Okay. And just to kind of wrap up for tonight, those who know God's guiding presence fear no evildoer or calamity. Fear has a difficult time gripping and clutching our hearts as we continue to realize and rest in the assuring presence of God. We may sense danger all around us, but terror cannot take hold of us. God is with us. Okay. Next week, as I say, we're going to do faith in the loving God. And thank you ever so much for all of your contributions. It really helps. And so we're going to turn the slides off, but let's talk about some of your fears and how you deal with them.